Hello, I'm Will Palin, Chair of the Sheerness Dockyard Preservation Trust, and I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about our project on the Isle of Sheppey, which is well underway and all very exciting, and also talking to the two lead designers in the project, the architect Broughton and the architect with the conservation specialism, Martin Ashley. So I thought we'd kick off with just a quick historical overview, and I'm going to bring up some slides. I hope they work. So first of all, just to help locate us in Kent, the Isle of Sheppey, of course, as most of you will know, is on the North Kent coast. I say most of you because I have given talks and had to remind people that the Isle of Sheppey isn't in off the coast of Scotland. So this is a slide showing the extraordinary site of the former Royal Naval Dockyard. This aerial view must be from probably 1980s, I imagine, and it shows a sort of triangular site surrounded by the dockyard wall, and this site was completely redeveloped from an earlier dockyard in the early 19th century, a collaboration between the famous engineer John Rennie and a series of architects working for the Admiralty, most important from our point of view being George Ledwell Taylor, who was the designer of Dockyard Church and a number of other key buildings in the former dockyard. The Naval Dockyard closed in 1960, obviously had a catastrophic impact on the economy of the island. It was taken over as a commercial port after that, and a lot of demolition happened, but fragments survive, and there are some extraordinary buildings that have managed to somehow cling on, and Dockyard Church is one of them. And here is a view of Naval Terrace and the Dockyard Church, taken from the late 19th century, a wonderful photograph showing a sort of cadet band with these great buildings in the background. And the important thing about this photograph, it shows Dockyard Church before its first fire, which was in the 1880s, which resulted in the building being redesigned slightly and losing some of its important detail. And we are going to be reverting to this original design as part of our project. An amazing model was made of the dockyard in the 19th century, which survives. It's one of the great architectural models of the 19th century. It's enormous, about 40 foot square when fully assembled. And we are going to be bringing back sections of this for permanent display within the Dockyard Church as part of our project. Some more views and elevations of the church. You can see that the images on your left show the church ruined at the top after its second fire in 2001, and the rebuilt Victorian church, late Victorian church, below, without that distinctive parapet line that surrounds the building. Here's how the church looked before we started our project, a forlorn shell, very much symbolising the sort of decline of the architectural heritage on the island. I'm pleased to say in the last 10 or 15 years, there's been huge efforts to repair and rehabilitate some of the important Georgian buildings in the dockyard. And the church is sort of the key building, the key symbolic building. And we have been working for about 10 years as a trust to get this project going. Here's the interior of the church as it looked before our project. A shell, you can see grass growing, and that photograph was taken just after the interior was cleared. There were whole trees in the interior of that building before we started the project. And some of the delightful detail. This is a spectacular neoclassical building designed by George Ledwell Taylor, with these spectacular ionic columns in the portico and lots of other really beautiful, satisfying detail. And we're going to, our aim is to retain everything we possibly can that survives from the fire. And then the question is, who do we get to actually undertake this project? As a trust, we went through a lengthy procurement process after we received our lottery grant of 4.2 million. and we looked to a trust team that I've worked with before, and Martin Ashley, who is one of the leading conservation architects in the country, has worked on many, many important historic buildings, including the Painted Hall, which I mentioned before. This was a collaboration between Hugh and Martin as a design team that brought off this extraordinary award-winning project. Our aim is to reinstate the exterior of the building, and pretty much as matching those designs from George Ledwell Taylor, the early Georgian building, and do an exquisite conservation job on the exterior and the tower. Inside, however, there's more flexibility, and we have plans to put in essentially a modern interior which will support a youth enterprise incubation centre to help young people start new businesses. It's a tried and tested model that we're using, and we're going to be working with a youth enterprise and a charity and specialist operator to deliver this element of the project, which is so important to the island. Lots of consultation locally when we started the project, and here's some latest photographs from the site showing work well underway. We started in November 2020, and this is the interior already taking shape with the new sort of the bottom level of the floor now laid. Welcome both of you, and perhaps a question for each of you, starting with you, Hugh. What for you makes this project special, different, interesting, challenging?
That's thanks so much for the introduction, Will. I mean, I think my sort of interests in the project constantly kind of change. And I find that, for example, at the moment, only last week, we were up on the scaffold around the perimeter of the church and then going inside. And I suddenly realized that absolutely phenomenal sort of proportions and qualities of light that are going to exist within the sort of reinvigorated church, things that I probably hadn't realized before, but which really sort of almost sort of set my heart racing at the prospects of what this building is going to be like. I mean, obviously, when we started out, the things that really excited me were the prospect of rebuilding the church, in essence, in large parts, and also of introducing its new use, its business incubation centre for people on the Isle of Sheppey. But as I say, you know, each time you go, there's another aspect of the church that sort of reveals itself that then gets you all the more excited about its future prospects. So, yeah, I think you could ask me again next week and I'd have discovered something else that would have got me equally sort of animated.
And Martin, what about you? I know that you've got a longer sort of association with the building because you helped with some emergency repairs early on in the project, but does it still have that sort of feeling for you, or something special and more inspiring?
Tremendously so, Will. It is such a needy and deserving project, obviously, with all of the trials and tribulations that the building has gone through, and the state that it's been in since the last fire in 2001. And so tremendously needy, but also it's a project where there's a real opportunity to give the building back some of its lost dignity. Because when the church was rebuilt following the 1880s fire, it was done so by the Admiralty's civil engineer, who stripped down the details and didn't quite understand the importance of this really noble neoclassical exterior, standing within its setting in the historic quarter of the dockyard. But then, as a chap who's spent all of his working career working with historic buildings, what always excited me is the process of helping to re-enliven historic buildings and set them up for the next few generations.
Thanks, Martin. The next question, which I'm not trying to stir up trouble between you, I promise, but you obviously, in terms of training and skills, you and your practice have historically been focused more on new build, on new technology. We've looked at the Halley 6 research station there as an example. And Martin, obviously, your whole career has been working with historic buildings, lovingly caressing and nursing them back to health. Are there points where you come into conflict, the two of you?
Oh, I'm definitely going to let Martin answer that first.
Oh, that's harsh. Truly, no. And the reason is that I'm passionate about historic buildings, but I'm also passionate about their need to evolve. And we love our historic buildings because they contain evidence of the continuing cycle of history and change back through the decades and back through the centuries. Well, Hugh and myself now, on behalf of the Dockyard Preservation Trust, have this incredible opportunity to be part of this new cycle of change. And so I accept as a conservation architect that there's historic fabric here, that it's important to preserve, important to retain that chronology of what has gone before. But in effect, what Hugh is doing with his imaginative proposals is adding a new chapter into the life of the building. It's all about the ongoing process of change. And Hugh and myself have worked before in this way, conserving the best of what is there to be conserved, but creating change and adding in new. And there's always good common ground. There's always common sense and reason in doing this.
As custodians at a certain point in a building's history. And we're interested, I think, in that reinvigoration, that concept of proper conservation, and also of allowing buildings to continue to have an exciting contribution to the environment in which they find themselves in. So I think many times, in fact, we find ourselves verging into each other's territory. I have, through this building-led approach or philosophy, I have views on, the contribution that conservation will make to the final appearance of the building. And Martin has very clear views as well on how the new interventions might impact upon the reading of the historic building. And I think that fusion is really important. And it's a collaboration which I certainly value enormously, and which I think it's, the sum of the parts is really significant in the overall achievement, which I hope this project will manage.
Yeah. Well, may I just add in response to that? I thank you, and I totally agree. I think being able to work in this way as a collaboration, bringing the best of both Phyllis' design skills and my conservation skills, bringing those two together is absolutely electrifying. It means that it takes me as a conservation architect to places that I wouldn't go otherwise. And I find that terribly exciting, and perhaps Hugh feels a bit the reverse of that also.
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Martin. You've sort of covered my next point, really, and it was a bit of a naughty question because I've worked with you both, and I know exactly how the benefits of that collaborative process. And I remember at times at Greenwich when it was actually Hugh who was being more sort of protective of the conservation elements than Martin. So it was nice to see. I think what's so important is the two disciplines coming from different angles, being able to give a sort of fresh view on some of the challenges when we're taking on a project such as Dockyard Church. And I've been over the scaffolding with you both, looking at the philosophy of the repair work, but also having to be pragmatic and sensible about the fact that this building needs to work and needs to be a living building. And of course, the project needs to be affordable, and there are compromises that must be made along the way. And I say as a client, we get sort of double the value from having both of you there on site. And I'm not saying there aren't the occasional moments where we might have disagreements, but actually, thank goodness there are those disagreements, because I think it makes the project more robust that we are questioning those decisions as we go along. Hugh, is there any particular element of this specific project that you're still sort of chewing over and still haven't quite resolved yet? I know we're well underway, but are there elements that you're sort of still resolving in your mind?
I'm not sure if necessarily at a sort of strategic level, but I think we're sort of well organised in that respect. But for example, 2 weeks ago, Martin and I were on the scaffold looking at the interior fabric of the church and working out the extent of conservation that would take place to the interior fabric, which obviously will make a significant contribution to the feeling of the church when you first walk in. So the strategy here has been very much one of preserving what we find in place and conserving it, not adding to it, and trying as hard as possible not to lose any of that existing fabric. And that's really very important, because after 2 fires, obviously there's not much of the kind of interior finishes in particular that are left in place. So we want to be very careful to maintain everything that we can find, but not distort the perception of the church by adding too much to those kind of finishes. So we've been having quite a lot of discussion about how far that conservation should go, what should be done with, for example, the protruding elements of burnt timber that stick out of the walls, how to preserve the elements of remaining plaster, really at quite a kind of detailed level. And Martin and his team have done an amazing job really surveying everything to the kind of nth degree, so that we can work out exactly, what can and can't be kept. And I think, so I feel very confident about the approach that we're taking, but it is very much a process of, looking at each individual thing, and only now that the scaffolding is up can one properly complete that kind of process.
Martin, is it, are you talking about the sort of guiding philosophy, but essentially a case-by-case decision made on each element as you examine it? Is there a sort of happy marriage between a sort of overall strategy and being able to have the flexibility to make decisions according to the needs of a particular area of the building?
Yes, it is most definitely that. It's each case on its merit. And finally, work of this type is all about compromises, and it's a question of where you join the compromise, where you draw the compromise in order to achieve the result that is going to be most pragmatic, most practical, most aesthetic. And those are the judgments that are being made all the time. And what Hugh has referred to, standing on the scaffolding together and looking at the interior. Well, you mentioned in your introduction that this is a powerfully designed building. It's a noble building, the portico and the great tower, of course. But what we've seen recently, and I remember Hugh remarking on it, when the temporary deck went in, contractor's deck, in effect almost as if it were a roof, you can now walk into that space and you can feel the power of that noble interior. And that's what Hugh is creating here with the design work that he and his team are doing. And so we have to make a judgment now, which Hugh has already alluded to, about how to pitch the presentation of the ruined internal walls. And it is all about how much of the archaeology that you leave in the walls, but it's also how we bring it all together so it's not impractical or visually distracting from the primary proposed use of the building going forward. So we need this interior to work visually. It needs to feel restful, calm. It needs to hang together. And you've got fire damaged carpentry, you've got stonework expressed visually, you've got an awful lot of brickwork, of which a fair amount of it is badly damaged by the fire or by water penetration and frost since the roof was burnt off. And you've got the incredible surviving remains of the plasterwork from the 1880s restoration, which was quite a remarkable departure for the building. It wasn't like that before. In the early 19th century chapel was much more austere. And so this we're saving as well, but we've got to find a way of bringing it all together. And that's what we're working together on at the moment.
Thanks, Martin. Sorry to interrupt you. Hugh, I remember when we sat down at the early design meetings and you came up with your first concepts, which were trying to do exactly what Martin's talked about, keep the sort of nobility of the building, the sense of it being special and different, yet sort of get a sort of modern working building there as well. You and the project architect, Robert Songhurst, produced this extraordinary 3D model, which, do you want to talk a little bit about that and how that's helped in the design process? Because it is something which it's the first time I've seen it used to this extent on a project like this.
Yeah, I think it's really been, it's been a rather fantastic demonstration, I think, about how technology in design can be used in the context of a historic building. I think people always think that these new sort of drawing technologies and 3D design and so on are really geared around brand new buildings, but actually it's proven to be a totally fantastic tool in the sort of reinvigoration of the Dockyard Church and allowed us to really investigate all sorts of details. I'm always a great believer that details should be developed in 3D, because you always need to look at the corners, and it's the way that things span out from corners is always the sort of telling part of any detail, really. And using the 3D design tool has been absolutely fantastic for doing that, also for investigating the use of different materials and looking at how the light will work within the space, both the natural light and then in the evenings, the artificial light. And I think we've really generated all of our drawings out of this 3D model. We've kept it up to date as new things have been found. And it's really been, an awesome tool for just, in a way, curating the design process, I think.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to see that sort of model in process, we have clips and sort of fly-through clips on our website, and they are really striking as a tool for fundraising and bringing interest to the project. It's been absolutely invaluable from that client point of view too.
I think the one thing I would say as well, sorry, Will, just to butt in about the use of technology is, I think it's perhaps something that people don't realize about the whole conservation process. It is actually a remarkably technically sophisticated process. You know, when we're looking at things like the conservation of the Dockyard Church, there's investigations into plaster. We're looking at structural solutions to enhance the performance of the fabric at really quite a technical level. So there are all sorts of aesthetic judgments which are taking place, which Martin has just described, but there's also some very sophisticated technical considerations to do with keeping the water and the wind out in the future, preserving the environment internally from a heat and humidity perspective, and so on. And all of these things require quite a degree of investigation. So this 3D type technology is well suited to that. And I know that's something that you also have been quite enthusiastic about, is that sort of fusion between the latest kind of technology and then returning the church back to its 1828 origins. And the two might seem very much at odds with each other, but actually they are very complementary.
I'm really sorry. I'm conscious of time. We are up to our kind of half-hour slot. I mean, this is one of those discussions we could carry on for hours and hours. I just wanted to thank you both, because I know how busy you are. To spend half an hour just chatting about a project is a great pleasure, but I also appreciate your time. And I think it's important that everyone knows that the plan is for the church to reopen and be operational by September next year. So it is suddenly it all seems rather close. So there's a lot of work to do. And again, I'd just like to thank you both for joining us for this discussion.
Great pleasure.
Thanks, Will.